Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. Today on the program, former Senator Bong Revilla is now a free man.
Pinaniwala ang mga publiko na isa kang magnanakaw. Gayong alam nila sa kanilang mga sarili na imbento lang ang lahat ng kaso. Anak ng teteng!
After the Sandiganbayan finds him not guilty of plunder.
The lesson is make sure you do it right. In other words, what the money is intended for.
But how will his acquittal affect other pork barrel-related cases?
Dapat walang epek yan sa ibang kaso.
Also, Congress is set to decide on the extension of martial law in Mindanao.
I think they were able to present some very compelling reasons.
Now is a time for rehabilitation, good governance, peace and order, na hindi na po kailangan ng martial law po dito.
And is pork barrel still part of the 2019 national budget? Former Supreme Court spokesman and law professor, Atty. Theodore Te, joins us live. And later, know the story of this year's CNN hero and the children's shelter called Inspira. That's for today's In Focus.
This program is brought to you by Bank of Commerce, an affiliate of San Miguel Corporation.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Pinky Webb. The camp of Senator or former Senator Bong Revilla is confident that they will get a favorable decision on his remaining graft charges following his acquittal from plunder by the Sandiganbayan last week. Also, Congress will hold a joint session to discuss the extension of martial law in Mindanao, but will there be enough grounds to extend it? Let's go straight to the source of the story, former Supreme Court spokesman, Atty. Theodore Te. Attorney, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Is it also, are you a little bit freer now to speak up?
Yes, subject of course is the usual limitations on, libel, defamation. I can't talk about pending cases still because, those are matters that the Supreme Court will still talk about.
Right, but
yes.
we can talk about theoretical issues.
Yes.
On the theoretical
yes,
side
yes.
of things. Of course, I say that because as former spokesman, you know, every time you had to speak on was it a Monday or a Tuesday?
Tuesday.
To
Yes.
the Supreme Court and Bank, it's always the dispositive portions that
Yes.
you read.
Yes.
And, your conversation with you was very limited back then. But, of course, that's changed now. Bong Revilla acquitted. Your thoughts on that, sir?
Well, I think I wrote and tweeted about that already. The acquittal is there. The dispositive portion says he is not liable. They cannot hold him liable. So that means that the court, the Sandiganbayan, said that there was not enough proof beyond reasonable doubt. So the question there is, did the Sandiganbayan say he was innocent? They never did.
What does that mean? Because from my understanding, sir, any case that is put forward, that is in court, for you to be guilty, it must be proven without reasonable doubt. I just say this, whether you're guilty or not, if it is not proven beyond reasonable doubt, you're not supposed to be rendered a guilty verdict, right?
Yes, but under the rules of court, there are two forms of acquittal. One is that the court will say there is absolutely no proof beyond reasonable doubt, and the other one is that they failed to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Is that so?
Yes. So technically, in the first instance, the court is basically saying he's innocent. Okay. In the second one, the court is saying that prosecution did not meet the burden.
Did not establish the proof beyond reasonable doubt. So you're
yes.
saying in the case of Senator Bong Revilla, it's the second?
It's the second.
Because the prosecution
yes,
failed.
Because that's what the court said. The court said we cannot hold him liable.
Yes.
Yes.
And were they correct?
Well, given I know I don't have access to all the court records. I only have what is on the decision.
But that's all you lawyers read anyway, right?
No, we do read all the records.
More research on that.
Yes, but given the dissenting opinions and the main opinion, I find myself, with some questions that that the main opinion does not answer.
Such as?
First, the AMLA certification. The money went out. It went to a bank account, his bank account. It tallied with the bank account of the main whistleblower, right? And so, those are questions that should have been answered in the decision to explain the acquittal, to explain why there was no proof beyond reasonable doubt. Second question.
Before you go to the second one, it's really the premise here, so we understand this better. It was because the AMLAC report said that in 2007 to 2010, there was about 87 million, please
Yes.
correct me if I'm wrong, deposited
More
to
or less, yeah.
Revilla's account,
Yes.
which kind of like tallies to the
Yeah.
ledger
Yes.
of Ben-Hur
Ben-Hur
Louis,
Louis,
that
yes.
deposits were made not more or less on around the same
Yes,
time that
that's
there
right.
was deposit made
Yes,
on the Revilla
yes,
account.
yes.
Okay, so do you think that is, how should they have proceeded with that?
Well, again, the AMLAC is an entity that is created by law. There's a mandate to the AMLAC, and that's their mandate, to certify that money went out and went in, and the certification actually should be entitled to great credibility. And when the court appreciated the weight of the evidence, that certainly should have been considered. The second one, I think, goes into the conspiracy, because they said, the majority said that the conspiracy was broken because there was no direct evidence. That's true. There's no direct evidence.
When
that
they say there's no direct evidence, it's because there's no
Meaning
direct evidence that's money
no
from
one saw him.
Yeah,
yes,
given to him.
Exactly. No one saw him receive the money.
No one
saw him give any orders, give any authorization. And the only thing that they had presented was a set of documents where his signature appeared. And that was the only link, according to the majority, to the former senator. And so when they discussed that, they said, look, we believe Mrs. Sula, I think Sula's testimony, the second time around, where she cast doubt on her previous testimony, that it looked like the signatures were not Mr. Revilla's signature.
Were forged.
Were
Can we
forged,
use that?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
So basically, the court took a look at that and said, okay, we think the signatures were forged. We do not know who forged them, but the signatures appear to have been forged. A great portion of the decision revolves around that. They even had pictures of the signatures, side-by-side comparisons. And so because of that, the court said, the only link to the former senator, was broken. And in a conspiracy, that's all you need to do. You take away the link, and
you break that, the chain.
Yeah, that's it. The chain is gone. So on that basis, they said, look, you can't prove the second element, that he actually amassed the amounts, and therefore he can be liable for plunder. So those 2 points. A third point, relative.
Before you go to the third,
okay.
so let's understand that.
Sure.
So they're saying that because from my understanding also, I asked Senior Associate Justice Carpio this, isn't the crime of one supposed to be the
Yes,
crime of all?
correct.
Then that's when he said, that's when the conspiracy element comes into play.
Yes.
And then here is where the justices were saying that there was no conspiracy because it was broken.
There was no conspiracy involving him.
Correct.
There was conspiracy
Tanggal si
as between
Senator
the two.
Bong Revilla.
Yes, that's right.
Pero si Cambe and si JLN,
They conspired. Yes.
because the signatures were
Yes.
supposedly forged,
Yes.
and that there was no money. No one could attest that money moved from somebody's hand
Yes,
to
correct.
the senator's hand.
Correct.
Okay.
So that brings me to the third point. The third.
But is that fair?
What do you mean?
Is a judgment, a decision of such fair?
Well, it's appreciation of the evidence.
Exactly.
And this
How
is-
do you appreciate that?
Correct. That's where I think we can have some disagreement, because the majority appreciated the evidence in that way. They said, look, there's no direct link anymore. The signatures were forged in our appreciation. The dissenting justices did not agree with that. They said, no, that's not the way we view it. There should have been more samples. You should have taken more. We could have gotten an independent witness. So you could have some disagreement on that point. The third point is something that perhaps should have been raised also by the majority. They said that, and this was also claimed by Mr. Cambe, he was not the chief of staff of Mr. Revilla. He said he was a legislative officer.
Like a liaison?
Well, not exactly. He would draft bills. He would do the legislative work. So he was not the chief of staff in the sense that he would be the surrogate or the alter ego of the senator. And so that was a significant finding and a significant admission by Mr. Cambe. Because if he wasn't the chief of staff, how did he get the power? How did he get the authority? How did he get the inside knowledge as to how much money there was? All the processes, that if this elaborate scheme that Ben-Hur Louis testified on, which the majority accepted as a conspiracy between the two, was actually carried out. And they're saying that Mr. Revilla had no knowledge.
So you're saying that how can a legislative officer,
Yes.
such as
Just a legislative officer. Yes.
get into this web
Yes.
of, connection
Yes.
of money changing
representing
hands?
himself on behalf of the senator and not being found out over the years.
Couldn't that be a little unfair? Because anybody might, I'm just thinking out loud, sir, that if you have a senator in his office, you may not be the chief of staff, but you can be one person there na mas malakas to the senator.
I agree. But that is where the link comes in, right? The money can only be released if the senator knows or has authorized the money to be released. It's his PDAF, right? And so to say absolutely he had no connection, he had no knowledge, I think that's a little bit, incredible. So the doubt you need to sustain a conviction is less than a proof beyond reasonable doubt. If you have a reasonable doubt, okay, then you can acquit. Now the question is the doubt here reasonable? That question, he's not the chief of staff. There should have been someone over him, presumably the chief of staff, the senator himself. Throughout all of these years, you mean to tell me the senator didn't know, had no inkling that this, minor, quote-unquote, functionary was doing all of those stuff?
That's fine. That could be total common sense to all of us.
Exactly.
But if you can't prove that in court, you can't prove it in court, period.
Correct.
Right?
But because the money had been proven to have been lost, right? So there clearly was money that was lost. So what could have been done? They could have said, okay, if you're not the chief of staff, if you're not if you're only the legislative officer, how could the money have gone out? Who else could have authorized the money to come out?
Who conspired with you?
Who conspired with you, right? Someone had to do it. If he needed to talk to someone, clearly that person would have believed him, not the chief of staff, some legislative officer, that he was speaking on behalf of someone, of the principal. That's a reasonable question, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't answered. It wasn't raised by the majority.
So I think you said it right there. It's a reasonable question that needed to be answered.
Yes, needed to be addressed by the majority.
We'll be taking a short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Still to come, we're still going to talk about what a criminal liability is versus a civil liability. And of course, martial law extension in Mindanao, justified or not? Attorney Theodore Te will still be with us after the break. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, former Supreme Court spokesperson, Attorney Theodore Te. So, is it clear, just so for our understanding, that an acquittal cannot be appealed?
Yes, because of the prohibition against double jeopardy in the Constitution.
Tama si Ombudsman Martires when he said that, this is elementary for people who are taking up law.
Tama yan. Because it's clear that when you're acquitted, even if you disagree with the acquittal, you cannot place the person in double jeopardy.
Game over.
Game over, except for one instance where
that's where I wanted to go.
Wherein there was no jeopardy in the first place. So the question would be if the proceedings were void.
How can the proceedings be void, Attorney? How can it be considered void?
It could be void if there was grave abuse of discretion on the part of the judge, or in this case the justices. So
what constitutes grave abuse of discretion?
Well, manifest partiality, bias, for example, clear and glaring bias could be grave abuse of discretion, refusal to follow decisions of the Supreme Court on the very particular point of law na klarong-klaro na, that could be grave abuse of discretion, disregarding authorities of the Supreme Court.
Do you see any of that available present here?
Mahirap sabihin kasi dito mukhang this looks like appreciation of evidence. The only time that has happened, I think, if I remember correctly, is Galman, yung kay Nina Aquino, and it was raised as a certiorari questioning jurisdiction, grave abuse of discretion, in acquit. Ver et al. Were acquitted of the assassination. Then the court at that time, Marcos was still here. They threw it out. They filed a motion for reconsideration. It was denied. Then Marcos was ousted. They filed a second motion for reconsideration. The court granted it, but very specific. The circumstances were very specific. They said that there was information that the justices were summoned by Marcos to Malacanang and told to acquit. So clearly, there was no trial that happened.
There was interference.
There was interference, yeah. And so clearly grave abuse of discretion. So in that particular situation, the court said, it was as if there was no judgment of acquittal. No double jeopardy here because there was no first jeopardy. So here, medyo mahirap. No, it's a bit difficult.
Okay, but what about the criminal liability versus the civil liability?
Yes.
So Senator Bong Revilla is not criminally liable, but he is civilly liable. The lawyers of the senator are saying this is not possible. Let's listen very quickly to a statement made by his lawyer.
Is Senator Bong criminally liable? He is not. And therefore, if you apply Article 100, then he cannot be said to have a civil liability. Then, since he is not criminally liable, then there's no basis for any civil liability. Then there's no basis for him to return the amount of 124.5 million pesos.
Please explain, when we are given these terms such as Article 100,
Is Senator Bong criminally liable?
Okay, look, Article 100 is in the revised penal code. Okay, it speaks about in every felony, under the revised penal code, there is always civil liability attached to it. So when in any crime that is committed, there is always damage. Correct. Okay, so the damage is measured also in terms of money, okay? Monetary terms, or even restitution if you can return the property taken, etc., etc. So in this case, it's money.
Doon tayo sa material.
Okay,
yun,
right.
Okay.
So that's what Article 100 says, and the decision quotes that. It says, based on Article 100, okay, so those criminally liable are also civilly liable. So the point of the camp of Senator Revilla is that you acquitted him, right? So therefore, he should not be civilly liable. But the difficulty here is that the dispositive portion does not actually say he's not included. The dispositive just says accused. Okay, and they're all accused.
I see.
If you read the dispositive portion, there are 3 paragraphs there. First paragraph, they said accused, Cambe, and Napoles. They were named specifically. Accused Cambe, Napoles, convicted.
That's clear.
Second paragraph, accused Revilla.
That's clear.
Acquitted. So they named the accused. Third paragraph, accused lang, collective.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a question now, who did the Sandiganbayan mean, right? So Attorney Balis's argument, no, that's the natural argument, you know, anyone in their position would make that argument.
Of course.
Because it's a logical argument, right? Except that there's also a rule in Rule 120 of the Rules of Court that says, if the court acquits, it must state that the basis from which the civil liability might arise does not exist. That is to rule out any civil liability. Here's the technical point, okay, that lawyers love to talk about. In a criminal case, you need to prove the guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the highest standard, very heavy standard, very high bar. In a civil case, you only need to prove liability by a preponderance of evidence. That's a lower liability, right? So
like a speck of doubt.
It's very possible that even if you don't prove the guilt, you've proven the act that may give rise to liability on a civil basis.
I like how you said that you don't prove the guilt, but you can prove an act.
And you can prove the act. For example, okay, let's not use plunder. Let's use killing of a person, right? Someone is killed. Okay, they say this person killed him. They don't prove his guilt because there's not enough evidence to prove his guilt because there's no reasonable doubt. But they manage to prove that he's responsible for the killing of this person.
And that's the act.
And that's the basis from which the civil liability might arise. So it can be made to pay, let's say, for the liability for the death of the person, damages. Okay, yeah. They did that for O.J. Simpson in the U.S. Yeah. Okay, so here in this case, they are saying it's possible that this is what the court is saying. He's not criminally liable because they were not able to prove the guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But the act of the money being transferred, being removed from the treasury, that was proven. Claro yun eh. That was proven. So he's liable. Now, again, the difficulty here is, and I think the lawyers of Revilla would probably do this, they'd move to clarify. Is he or is he not included? Yeah, they cannot just change it because the decision has been promulgated. It says accused.
I understand that, but two things. First, sir, how did you understand and appreciate the accused?
I appreciated all 3.
Okay, because they didn't name it.
They didn't name.
When they didn't name it, it's as if all 3 are included. But then again, I understand the point of the lawyer saying that you didn't name it. Now, the second is, forgive me, I still don't understand that. They said that we can't prove that you're guilty beyond reasonable doubt. I'll set that aside. But you need to pay. It's like you need to pay, from my understanding, sir, you need to pay this bribe that was given to you,
Yeah.
and you need to return that to government. But hey, you're not guilty.
Here's the problem with the decision. There is nothing in the decision that explains the civil liability. Nothing. Okay, if you read the decision, it just stops as far as criminal liability is concerned. There's nothing that explains the civil liability. So as far as the lawyers of Revilla are concerned, I'm not surprised
You
that
can
they're
question that to the highest.
They can question it because there's nothing there. There's not a single basis cited to support the civil liability of anyone. Well, except by implication the two who were convicted, right? But as far as Revilla is concerned, there's nothing in the decision that even connects him to the civil liability.
So how can they come up with a you need
That's the problem. But then here's where the court should follow the rules perhaps more strictly. Again, the rules of court says, if you want to remove the civil liability in acquitting the person, you need to say that the basis from which the liability might arise does not exist. That's what the rule says.
But
it never said that.
it was not a part of the decision.
It was not part of the decision.
But
that's why people are saying, maybe this is what the court is saying. Even when I read the decision, I saw the dispositive portion first. I said, how can he, I asked the same question that Attorney Belize asked. How is he civilly liable
But
if he's
not
not criminally liable? So I looked at the decision, looked for the ratio, the reasoning. I said, there's nothing here that supports that. But I also look for that line that says the basis from which civil liability does not exist, does not arise. It's not there as well. So there's some confusion there on the civil liability.
I don't really understand why we have to keep reading between the lines.
Well, yes, unfortunately, because the majority does not expressly say so.
All right, we'll be taking another short break. We'll be right back. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, former Supreme Court spokesperson, Attorney Theodore Te. Sir, just very briefly, who are you siding with? The 3 who acquitted or the 2 who said he should be
I read
acquitted?
all the decisions, including the 3 separate decisions, 1 concurring, 1 dissenting, 1 concurring and dissenting. I agree with the dissenters more than the main opinion.
AJ Maria Teresa Dolores Gomez Estuesta said, for justice to be served, one only needs to turn a discerning eye and not look the other way.
Yes, that's the first line of her dissent.
Ano ang ibig sabihin yan?
Parang sinasabi ni Justice Estuesta, huwag magbulag-bulagan.
Okay. Just moving on, very briefly, martial law, SAJ, Senior Associate Justice, saying it can be declared as long as the elements are present. Do you agree?
He's correct. Constitutionally, he's correct because the Constitution doesn't say how many times you can extend as long as, again, the elements are there and the Supreme Court agrees that the elements are there.
We forgot to mention that. After Congress in joint session approves this, it can be questioned before the Supreme Court.
Yes, the factual basis can be questioned before the Supreme Court.
Can decide on this. Thank you so much, Attorney Theodore.
Always a pleasure,
Good to talk to you when you are free to speak. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us here on The Source. I'm Pinky Webb. You're watching CNN Philippines.
This program is brought to you by Bank of Commerce, an affiliate of San Miguel Corporation.